All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to session 2 on day 3 of the Art of the Sword, an international Zoom conference about all things swords. My name is Matt Blazek. I'm the executive director of History Live Northeast, and this is a fundraising event for that organization that travels to schools, libraries. We'll go anywhere, actually. I've done a talk at a brewery once. It was a lot of fun. But we travel giving talks and demonstrations about history. One of our big projects we're working on is a mobile museum exhibit called the Evolution of European Arms and Armor, 1066 to 1650, although we may be expanding it. We've been working on that as well. So now we're going to start the second session of the day. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that they're not muted. We have with us the duo known as Pursuing the Knightly Arts on their YouTube channel. We have Reece Nelson and Ben Bruce, two Harnisfechten practitioners. How are you guys doing today?
Good. Glad to be here.
Good. A little chilly.
A little chilly. I'm in Maine. I don't want to hear about being chilly.
We had minus 15 the other morning, which is pretty cold for here.
That is pretty cold. We get that cold sometimes. So we're not that bad today. Not the sun's out, but. So you guys are going to give us a little talk, and we're going to talk about your journey in Harnisfechten here. Am I saying that right? Harnisfechten?
Yeah, I believe it's Harnisfechten.
Harnisfechten. Gotcha. Sorry,
Harnisfechten. Yeah.
My German pronunciation is not as good as it should be for what we do.
Americans, we still get it wrong. We've been doing it for a while, so.
Yeah, you have been doing this for a while. So, how long have you both been doing Harnisfechten?
Well, I think I've been doing it for about 13 years, give or take. The channel's been around for like 4 years. And Ben, he's been doing this for
I think about 6 years or so with actual harness. I started with Bloss first, but kind of rolled into harness because it's more interesting, I guess. I mean, I still do Bloss, but my main focus is harness.
And how did you both get started doing this?
Well, it was really, it was just like we held practice at Ben's house every weekend, and wanted to get more involved with harness. And it just kind of turned to where people would show up and they get harness and like, let's fight. Like, okay, cool, that's fun. But then we kind of walked away, not like really learning anything in particular or really advancing. So it was sort of a means of, well, let's, Ben and I, let's just study this on our own and study the source material, and that way we're just constantly trying to improve and understand better the sources and stuff.
Yeah, we heard a talk the end of the first day by a fighter named Evan Ringo, who talked about how a lot of Bohurt and SCA, the heavy armored, as they like to call it, they don't really a lot of them don't study the manuals. They just go out and spar all the time, and while there's something to be said about training that way, studying the manuals is really really gets you more into it and helps you understand it better. So Ben mentioned the term Bloss, and we were talking about harness. Can you guys tell us a little more? What is Harnisfechten? Harnisfechten? Can you explain that a little more to us? And what's the difference between Bloss?
Yeah. So basically, we call it Harnisfechten because there's a couple traditions that within HEMA or Western martial arts. So German, and then there's Italian. Italian's known as Armazzari. Those are the two main ones. But in the German tradition, they basically separate it in two categories: Bloßfechten, which means unarmored, which I believe it translates to naked fighting, it's in reference to that you are naked, you're unprotected. So in that, you see their targets, a lot of it being the face, the hands, torso, legs, wherever armor, you're not wearing armor, just fighting in basic street clothes. And then, through fight manuals and stuff, they'll have all that, and towards typically the end, the very back of it, there's Harnisfechten. So that is, you see different elements with that because the guy is in full armor, and you have to treat it differently, fighting an opponent on armor.
Yeah, it definitely changes the dynamic of how you can be wounded. In doing testing on flesh with sharp swords, a pig carcass dressed up in some medieval clothing, you can cut through it relatively easy. Multiple layers of fabric actually do impede a cut pretty well, but thrusting does absolutely no resistance on any of that stuff. So we see with the development, obviously of armor, was to prevent being cut and stabbed. As you get further on, and our time period, the armor is so complete that it definitely changes the dynamic of how the fight works. So there's a complete different way to approach the fight, and there's different techniques to defeat the person because they are so well protected.
So now this is a subset of HEMA, correct? The historical European martial arts. It's not all HEMA is Harnisfechten, but most Harnisfechten is HEMA. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. So like most, the mainstream HEMA, as it were, they primarily focus on the Bloodspectin aspect of it. So like primarily longsword. So you see lots of tournaments that include, longsword fighting, but there's various within Bloodspectin, there's various weapon systems like Messer, dagger, wrestling, but all those things transfer over to Harnisfechten to a degree. So it's actually, we recommend a lot of people like to study the fundamentals of Bloodspectin before just jumping into Harnisfechten, because those will transfer over.
It is very important to I guess get the point. The entire thing is a system, so it's not just harness is its own thing, and then longsword is its own thing. The entire thing was taught as a system, with the foundation being wrestling, because in medieval culture, wrestling was real standard. Everybody wrestled, kids wrestled. The best way to defend yourself against a guy that's got a knife is to be able to wrestle. You got to be able to get a hold of the guy and break him, or get him on the ground to stop the knife from being a threat. And if you study the entire system, wrestling, which we do wrestling with Jessica Finley. We do dagger out of multiple source manuals for just general dagger fighting, but all German on our end. All the way through, you hit Messer, longsword, even sword and shield being like 133. They're all applicable to harness when it comes down to it. There's just some stuff that you won't do. You won't do a shield howl, or you won't do a Zwerchhow armor, because it doesn't work against armor. Now you'll do very similar mechanical structural movements that use the same kind of structure that you would use in some of those techniques, that also comes from wrestling. So the foundation of it comes back to wrestling, which wrestling becomes a big part of harness. Because if you can't injure the guy standing and you can take him to the ground, he's easier to injure when he can't defend himself as well on the ground. If he can't run away.
So if you guys started with that sort of the basics of the HEMA Bloodspectin, well, what made you guys decide to take the leap and go into the fully armored?
Because it's cool.
Yeah.
Who as a kid didn't want to dress up in armor and fight somebody?
Yeah, I know.
Well, for me, like one of the first fight manuals I came across was Hans Talhofer, which we actually have a copy of it over here. But my friend bought it for me like in the bargain bin for like $5. Looked through it, and the stuff that really piqued my interest was the Harnisfechten section, and particularly like you see in the section they're wrestling, they're using axes, I'd never seen armor like that before, like in movies and TV. I was really interested in what was going on, but I mean, in particular, like the one that got me, that really had me asking a lot of questions was like the Mordschlag. So like it's where you grip a sword like this,
yep,
and use it like an axe almost. I was like, that's really interesting, because most people
they call it the murder. They call it the murder stroke or something, don't they?
Yeah, murder stroke, murder strike, sometimes referred to as executioner strike. But that is a common thing you see within the Harnisfechten treatises. So, but that was like the thing that got like, oh, what's going on here? That's just really cool. And just the more I started studying it and stuff, you look at because everything's encompasses everything. So the arms and armor, that correlates with the martial arts, with the history, all that stuff was like my jam.
So this sort of leads into how does the studying of the Harnisfechten differ from the other historical methods? Is it roughly the same? Drawing from the same materials, or is it completely the approach to it completely different?
It's the same materials for sure. Because in all the, like if you do the entire Lichtenauer's gloss, at the end of it there is harness. It's just the practical application of it. Clearly, you have to have some encumbrance because all armor encumbers you for any amount of protection that you get. You're always going to lose some mobility to move. You can't raise your arms as high, can't bend them as far. Also, the target areas that you're going to be fighting in, your range is going to be different because in Blossfechten, I want to be 12, 15 feet away from you because I can take a large step and cut and I can get you from 15 feet away. Where with a person in armor, I'm not really as worried about him getting 6 or 7 feet away from me because I'm covered in armor. He also can't cut me, so he's going to have to stab me, which means he's going to have to get the point into me. And it's easy, as everybody knows, it does HEMA with Blossfechten. A thrust is really easy to parry. You just slightly direct it out of the way, and they can't get to you. So it changes the dynamic of how you fight. So your approach to the fight changes. We've been from doing everything where I kind of understand a little bit of some of the Lichtenauer's process still applies to harness. It just applies in the way it works in the way you apply it differently. You're still doing the same principles. If you get the inside, you wrestle. You try to get your target first, and then you go to the next target, the next move, the next progression. Eventually, you're in contact, and he's going to the ground because you shouldn't risk the exchange if you follow the art the way it's laid out. You should be trying to win in as few moves as possible.
And it's a challenge because it's like how I put it is armor gives you more time.
Yeah.
Something where an attack were to come in, he places a point in your armpit and stuff. Well, you've got time because you're wearing mail and all that protection. So it progresses a little differently. In order for, let's say, in Blossfechten, you can do a thrust. You're just going through cloth. That's fine. It just goes in like no problem. However, in harness, you got mail. Mail requires a different sort of structure
To defeat it.
defeat it.
So you're talking about cuts and thrusts and things like that, and even though you're wearing armor and mail, there must be some modern safety considerations you take into account when you're working on potentially dangerous historical moves. How do you go about making sure you won't get seriously injured when you're doing this, or is that just bottom of the tier?
It's a risk for sure. I mean, you're in regular HEMA Blossfechten, you're worried about getting fingers broken. You get bruises, you get chipped bones on your elbows. If you're not wearing hard protection there. You can get concussions. In harness, you can get concussions. You're not as worried about getting chipped bones. You do get some bruises, but your armor actually does protect you pretty well. We get concussions. You can get your neck, snapped back. You get whiplash, that kind of stuff. The biggest things we actually have concern with, for the most part, is penetration from the weapon, because even a blunt weapon can be shoved through a human. Mail does a really good job of preventing that. There was actually an incident at a deed of arms that we were at that a guy was not wearing mail and he did get punctured through the armpit with a blunt tip sword. So he was very close to risking that axillary artery. Could have got torn and he would have been dead in 2 to 3 minutes. You can't tourniquet that.
Yeah.
Right.
As far as like equipment goes, it's actually very minimal. Armor, if you keep it of a historical design, it's actually, it's made very well. It's designed very well. Usually things we typically do is like we'll have obviously a cup. Don't want to get racked. That's not fun.
Getting stabbed in the groin is super common.
Yeah.
In places it's almost impossible to armor.
Yeah. So, but like for different groups have different rule sets and stuff. We require where if you don't have a grilled ocularia or like an open ocularia, you put like perf plate. So like a mesh sort of deal opening.
Have a helmet perf in it.
But for the most part, it's pretty much the same as you find on like living history sort of requirements. So
yeah,
the idea is that
as historical as possible.
As historical as possible. So with our rule set, it's armor as worn. So we try to keep it as historically correct as possible because you're doing historically correct techniques. and all that. So when you start to sort of modify something to, I don't know, accommodate or what you think is going to be safer,
More padding.
more padding and stuff, it gets a little, I don't know, mixed.
Yeah, you lose the lose the historical authenticity, which changes how everything functions.
What do you say?
It changes how you move. Beside the penetration and stopping the blade from getting in, we do use like a standard gorget. Historically, this existed, usually male around the neck, just to keep you from getting cut or stabbed. We do add a trauma plate because getting an impact to your esophagus is not good. I've been stabbed under my helmet in my throat pretty hard several times.
Yeah, I had mine, my windpipe slightly crushed.
Ugh.
No fun. So it's kind of minimum stuff.
Yeah, for the most part, it's just the historical gear does a really good job, other than the eyes and any penetration into the face. We generally fight with something closed and locked. Our helmets strapped. That's not necessarily historical, although there are a few examples of historical helmets that do have points where they could have been strapped down. Later period, they do lock down. But we've added straps because visors do pop open, and last thing you want is you pass them through, knock the visor open, and the sword go right to your friend's eye. So we do require that kind of stuff to be modified for safety versus historical accuracy. And we do make any consideration for safety that's not historical is approved because safety. We all want to go home at the end of the day. We don't do this for a living and don't want to die. So that's real. The second thing that we have safety wise is joints, because one of the big ways to defeat a guy in armor, two things, is to hit him with the earth or to break something on him. Gladiatory has a host of moves that involve wrenching or twisting an arm in such a way that you put your entire body weight into it, and you're supposed to snap the arm, the shoulder, or hit his face on the ground in the process.
Yeah. That's good.
We still use the techniques, but we have to use them with a degree of control and trust with your partner. If you realize the guy's got your arm there, you could fight and wrench, but his appropriate martial technique would be to finish the move and to break your arm and throw you on your face. So you have to accept defeat in that situation, knowing that you could actually be seriously injured, and you have to be cognizant while you're fighting to not lose, get into the heat of the moment and just wrench a guy's arm off because you're excited, which is it's a challenge for some people to do. So it takes some discipline.
Yeah, and a huge whenever we do like deeds of arms and stuff, we have marshals on the field, and they look specifically for those sort of techniques. So in our rule set, we have what's called an honor system. So we don't look for people who just win, right? We look for people who conduct themselves well in the field and display chivalric sort of principles.
If they can pull off historic techniques in the context of an opponent that's opposing them, and they succeed in pulling off several techniques, even if they lose the bout in the end by the point system that we're operating under, they're going to get praised because they executed correctly techniques under pressure and made it look good. So we're more for trying to keep the art alive rather than compete, because we've done it, and there's been situations where we've had competition. When you put a prize up and you get guys that are competing with the idea of the prize and they don't care about their opponent, you get sprained knees, hyperextended joints, fingers broken. You start running into concussions. And when we get concussions, not as much now since we've changed simulators, but we get concussions fighting axe semi-regularly because you are genuinely hitting each other in the head with something that weighed 3.5 pounds. So
are there any moves that are historic moves that are just too dangerous that you guys won't do?
Yeah, several. Yeah, there's like for gladiatoria, for instance, there's techniques where you hook the guy's wrist and you pull him down, and then the text specifically says break his elbow and throw him to the ground at the same time.
When applied at speed with intent, their elbow offers no resistance. My armor, since it is articulated, actually resists the reverse hyperextension a little bit, but when we were working through that technique specifically, it for sure there's no problem if he stepped down, my arm's gone. I don't have a choice.
And that's your armor behind you, right, Ben? That's your suit. That's your kit
Yeah, that's my harness there.
harness.
Trevor S18 for those nerds interested.
Yeah.
We actually did a video on this. It's called Joint Manipulation. It was a video response to Ian Laspina from Knight Errant, and it showed differences on just
Armor protection.
armor protection. So my harness, for the most part, was considered floating articulation. So that adds a lot of mobility for me to do certain actions and stuff. Whereas Ben's is articulated, so it's a little limited. However, given the context of doing certain techniques and stuff and falls and whatnot, that offers more protection for him. So we did a technique. There's a gladiatorial technique where you enter the bind and then you simply just place your knee on his, your foot on his knee and blow out his knee.
Yeah.
And since mine wasn't articulated, that's extremely easy to do. Very terrifying.
Yeah.
Then given his locks, because it's articulated, I couldn't do that. And then what's kind of neat is that certain masters, I want to say Paul's Cal, or someone else, but they recommend that you put pressure on the inside or outside to make him turn, because they know that if you go straight in, they'll lock up and you can't perform that technique. You won't do anything.
Yeah, there's an axe technique in gladiatoria that you stick the half between their thighs and you wrench it.
Lejeune,
You're talking about gladiatoria. And Lejeune, sorry, an axe technique in Lejeune. And that particular technique, if the opponent is resistive at all or has their feet planted well, you can actually dislocate their hip in the process because you're using a 7-8 foot lever to crank their hips apart. And it's one of the moves that we don't do in earnest, yeah, because you could definitely be good with it.
Are there any new moves you've come across that you're excited to give a try that you haven't done before?
Yeah, I mean, well, a lot of them that's the great thing about what we do is that we work through techniques, we train with them and stuff, and then we get to go do tournaments and deeds of arms and stuff. So we get our opportunity to test them out. So a little difficult to try to do that when someone's not being, what's the word? They're not letting you. They're not cooperative.
Yeah.
So
you gotta get the right situation, the right opening,
right timing,
the right opponent, because certain techniques are better against a guy that's aggressively approaching versus a guy that tends to come in and back out. So it changes how where the technique will work even. So you got to get that window that particular technique works.
But when you pull it off, it's awesome.
Oh yeah.
But as far as like there's certain techniques. I mean, we all have goals that we want to do. I want to really do we did a technique on Lejeune Ash, the play of the axe, where you disarm your opponent. You use the beak of the axe, you pull between their hands, a demi-ash, and just wrenches right out of their hand. I want to pull that off. That's super sexy. I think Ben, we've been reading up on like Jacques Delaine, and there's a guy Thomas, a French guy named Thomas. He picked a dude up and threw him over out of the list. I want to see Ben do that.
Yeah.
So Reece, this question's for you, and I don't want to dwell on this because I think it's important to acknowledge this, but I think you're much more than this one aspect. But you approach this from a very interesting perspective in all your training and combat, because if people don't know, Reece only has one leg. So your training is must be. How do you approach that to overcome that?
Well, a lot of different ways. So actually, Ben's going to show you the process I work. So it's actually been a long journey. So basically, just to tell you the context of it, I lost my leg at birth. So I was born 2.5 months premature, and the umbilical cord wrapped around my leg and cut the circulation, and they had to amputate. So since then, I have 2 inches of my femur and my hip, which is actually a fairly rare level of amputation. But it wasn't until probably 2 years ago I finally found like a prosthesis that I can wear all day comfortably. And that was in itself a very long journey. But getting back to the martial arts aspect of it, it's a challenge. It's I do things differently, obviously, than some people. I can't bend my knee for certain wrestling techniques. Footwork is going to be a little bit different, for someone like myself, but I tend to focus on the fundamentals. So whatever we're doing, the techniques and stuff, I focus on, covering center, my posture and stuff, and focusing on those elements that will, work for me. So unfortunately, I'm a practitioner. I want to do it all, but I know there's certain things I just can't do. So, I'm thankful to have a training partner like Ben, because Ben will actually work with me to try to help me figure out how to best approach a fight, how to best make the technique work. We kind of go back and forth that way, So, yeah, it's a way different approach than someone with both legs doing this, So, yeah, I don't know what else to say about it, but
It's different.
it's different, yeah. So, what's kind of fun for me, it's interesting to me, is that I've done blow specting in the past, but actually doing Harnisfechten actually is more beneficial for me as an amputee. With blow specting, you have wider steps, but with my level of amputation, I sometimes slip out of the socket, so I don't have enough of my residual limb to hold me in place. So with harness, actually, I'm wearing a cuirass, I'm wearing a fall. The fall will actually, it close around my upper legs, and it helps keep my leg from going outside of where it escapes the socket.
That's neat. I didn't know that. That's actually a pretty effective use of the harness then. So
yeah. But yeah, and I tried numerous things. I mean, for years, Ben could tell you. Like we tried like a medieval suspension system. We tried actually lacing the prosthesis to a arming doublet. I tried leather straps to hold it in place to prevent me from shifting and stuff, but it's been a really, really long journey. So I'm still working through what he just showed you there is my prototype. I'm still working through a prosthesis, for Harnisfechten for martial arts study, because you go to a practitioner and you tell them you want to do martial arts, the primary concern is going to be, well, we got to get you walking.
Yeah.
That's number one. Walking and fighting are two separate things.
Yeah. The requirements and the way you load the leg and move it is completely different.
So earlier, just to sort of backtrack a little bit, you mentioned how different groups might have different rules. Is there a single overarching sort of rule set for this, or is it all each group makes up their own thing?
In our experience, most places we played with we have the same rule set. The thing about it is that Harnisfechten is still relatively new to most people. So, like in Europe, I didn't see really anybody have perk plate. Our group, we require perk plate with our rule set stuff, because we're going for the eye slits and face and stuff. But it's like that's pretty much the only difference that I've seen for the most part. I mean, apart from just I can't think
the Dekoven Concord is the rule set that we do use, and it's been adopted by most the groups around that it was a formalized group. It was done by the Companions of Seven Swords made a set of rules to basically kind of codify and give people a reference of something, because prior to that it was just whatever happened wherever everybody went was what happened, and there was just no there was no cohesive agreement on what was right and what was wrong, and it's really real basic common sense stuff for the most part. It's just safety things like brutality is one, hitting somebody so much harder than you need to demonstrate a martial art technique. And we're not trying to knock the guy out for real, because we're not, playing that kind of game. That's one of the rules that you can be, ostracized for. If you continually, if you got a pole axe and you hit somebody as hard as you can every time you get close to them, you might be talked to about just smashing somebody's head in, when all you really have to do is make contact to demonstrate that you were able to hit them. I mean, we hit each other hard still, but it's not, it's not necessary to whale a guy 7 times in the top of the head when you're trying to score a point.
Yeah, and I would argue with that is that, like, if you study the sources stuff, that, like, they're really big on structure. They're really big on, when you let's say for axe, you swing the sword, the axe, you're not just using your arms, you're putting your body behind it, right? You're adding that structure, and just by doing your arms and stuff, it's one, it's going to wear you out, and two, it's just going to be just an unnecessary amount of force. And if you swing an axe with that structure behind it, it doesn't plenty of force. And the best part is you can
control it.
You can control it.
Yeah.
You're not doing all. You're using your body mechanics to deliver the blow rather than the strength of your arms.
Yeah. And if you miss, your axe is still in a position to do something, other than wailing past somebody and hitting the ground and leaving yourself open.
Do you guys see a lot of or any crossover from the different, like, do you guys bring in people from, like, the living history reenactors, the SCA, or even like CrossFit, even the bow hurt fighting communities, or are you guys sort of insulated on your own?
Well, it's, for the most part, it's like kind of our own niche, special niche thing. But since we've launched the channel, we've had numerous people message us like, "Oh man, I want to do what you guys do. It's so cool. How we get involved?" So we've had people that came from SCA background contacting us. There's guys, some guy from Eastern Europe that does bow hurt contacted us, and he actually formed his own tournament within the Cove and Concord rule set.
Oh, neat.
Interesting to see.
We've had some bow hurt guys come out and practice with us. We've had SCA guys come out and practice with us. It's usually a culture shock, kind of, not so much both ways, because we know what to expect from them because we've seen the sports there. That side, SCA or bow hurt, either one. It's usually a shock to them when they come to us because we thrust, and they come from backgrounds that don't allow thrusting and actually are concerned with thrusts. So it is definitely a culture shock when they come here, although we also don't try to knock our opponent's head off either. So we do lose, like, we do have a slight difference in the way we approach what we're doing too. Shield fighting, for instance, we've had an example with a guy fighting with a shield, punch shield. And in the context of what we were doing, he was talking about, showing his techniques, and we're showing him our techniques, talking about, the art and how it applies from the manuscript versus, the game that they play. And I had demonstrated to him. I was like, okay, you hit me in the face with the shield, right? So he hits me in the face with the shield, and I grabbed it and I twisted his arm up and pushed him to the ground. And I was like, in the context of our fight, that shield's a liability, which is why in the duels, like gladiatory, you see a duel with a shield, you have an encranche. Well, the encranche is held as a buckler and easily discarded, because as soon as the guy's close enough to touch you and that spear is no longer going to be thrown at you, or that sword is not going to be thrown, that encranche is a liability now that you have it. Your armor is your protection. The shield was just that extra bit for some big missile coming at you. So we see, changes in like the way the sport's done, or the way the game's played, changes off of the application of technique. Their technique is to hit you in the head, knock you unconscious, or cause pain, cause you to comply to quit in that sport. SCA is just going for it, hitting you hard enough that you acknowledge the hit, because you can ignore the hit in SCA, right? If somebody hits you hard and you go, nah, it wasn't hard enough, then they just hit you harder the next time, and then harder the next time, until you finally acknowledge the hit. That's the experience that I've ran into.
I always took very light hits. I never wanted to get hit that hard.
It's a little different when you're doing Harnisfechten. It's like you can't really just not acknowledge your hit. It's like, okay, this point's coming into my throat, and I feel it hitting my windpipe.
You kind of have to, yeah. So when these guys come to you for the first time, or reach out to you, what advice do you give to anybody that wants to get started in this?
Well, you know, it's really as simple as like get some source material and try to work it out with a friend. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah,
oh,
sorry,
sorry. So it's just like it's how we started. You know.
Yeah.
But you know, I would say personally, for my is like find a maybe HEMA club. You know, maybe learn flow specting first to understand the fundamentals. Because wrestling, a big one's posture, your stance. Fiore does a really good job at illustrating this too. But you know, find a HEMA club, understand those fundamentals, and then you will see eventually how you know those transfer over to harness. So for starting out, you know, people assume we get messages all the time. It's like, oh man, I want to do what you do, but I can't afford armor.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you have a fencing mask? Yeah. You have a
Jacket.
sword, a jacket? Yeah. Just do it.
Yeah.
Recommend getting some gauntlets because you know
Yeah.
fingers can smash and stuff. But there are ways you can do it now. You can start studying for it now without having to harness.
Yeah, you can simply take tape and mask all the target areas where you would have a gap, armpit, inside the elbows, palms are given, and practice the techniques where the only thing that's valid is getting the point into that spot and pushing. That's where the difference in the target comes with our deal because we require structure. So you have to practice that, and that's a little hard to do without the harness because with the jacket on, when somebody puts a thrust with structure into your armpit pushes, it's less comfortable than with mail on because the mail does distribute some of the force. But that getting that weapon into a proper structured point where you can actually push the opponent because testing piercing mail or causing damage past mail, you do require quite an amount of force in to do that.
Yeah, you have to compress the soft tissue basically.
So training that is the only thing that may become a hindrance, but you can still practice getting your point to the target and fending the center line. That's a big one that Reece mentioned earlier that he does a lot of is the fundamental stuff, covering center, proper posture and all that, which is great to practice in a fencing jacket because you can actually do it with minimal force to where all you have to do is just engage the blade and cover center and try to use your structure, position, and contact on your sword being strong, weak, you know, on the sword to displace them so you can gain access to a target. So that's a real good one. We do that a lot when it's too cold. We'll put on fencing jackets, masks, and go out there and just work on covering center and gaining a target without going full, you know, full structure thrusts and twisting arms and stuff as much.
Now, just a quick note. We do encourage people to eventually get harness because that totally changes things.
Yeah.
It changes how your center of gravity is going to be higher. You get the weight, of course,
Weight.
and you know it's going
Can't
to
breathe.
can't breathe. So feeling or fueling becomes a really big part of harness fecting. Can't see. So, but
You can see better than
See
you
better-
think, but
yeah, but I mean those things when you put on harness and stuff, it's like everything kind of comes together. It's like, you know,
everybody that ever first puts on harness, you know, full harness, and you lock their helmet down, most people can put one on and they're like, oh, this isn't bad, I'm good. And as soon as we will do a wrestling exercise where you just grab arms and you pull and twist and wrench on each other to get used to, you know, balance and feeling, you know, feeling your opponent move and that dance of keeping posture and balance, not falling down. And we'll pull and wrench on each other. The first time you put somebody under exertion and they have the armor on, almost everybody that's ever put armor on that I've dealt with that hasn't done it before will have what we call helmet horror and they'll panic. They'll start clawing at their face, trying to get the mask off. They lose coordination. If you're claustrophobic, you know, it's another part that'll add on to the anxiety part when that happens. It's a mental thing that we've got two things that are in play there. One is a buildup of CO2. You have sensory in your sinus that detects CO2 levels. And when you're in a harness and your CO2 is confined in your face, you detect higher levels of CO2 and your body will go into a panic state that's actually completely separate from your brain. It's a natural, you know, not an autonomic response. So you actually will seriously think you're dying, even though you're not, you're fine. People will panic the first time, and you learn to moderate this, but you will panic the first time, especially when you exert. and you lose like the cognitive ability. You can't get the strap off. You're not getting the helmet off yourself. You start freaking out. Yeah, it happens to almost everybody we've dealt with. They'll get that panic. After the first time, usually the next time it's not as bad. And then the next time they get you start to learn to just calm down and breathe and just slowly undo your helmet. And I've definitely had plenty of times where I've walked off the field and everybody's like, "Oh yeah, you did great." And I'm going, "Don't touch me. I need to open this helmet so I don't freak out." And then I get the helmet off. I start huffing and breathing as hard as I can because I'm about to die.
Mine was
Yeah,
always
all
wanting to get my breastplate off. That was always, it's like helmet didn't bother me so much, but I would get to a point where I'm just like, I gotta get this thing off me. So I can be like,
Yeah.
do that. So you guys have traveled all over the world here. I know Reece has. Ben, have you traveled internationally?
I've traveled across the country. I haven't gone out of.
So
Yeah, we had plans to do that this year, but of course.
yeah, everybody had plans to do something like that this year. I was gonna try to come down to Days and Nights last year and hang out with you guys, but that of course, didn't work out. But so what's your favorite event so far that you've been to?
New Year's first.
Honestly, I mean, our annual Deed of Arms is obviously high on the list, primarily because initially we were the focus of it when Trevor and Bruce and them started it. It was pretty small. It was just a handful of people came, but the idea was to have an event that was immersive. So it's kind of like smashing living history and the martial arts together. And it was medieval camping. People would bring tents and set them up in a big field, kind of, similar to the cloth of gold type setup, not as fancy, obviously, but, the idea that when you're in camp and when you're hanging out, you have all this, medieval aesthetic around. Everybody's wearing, medieval clothing. We range in a larger range of time periods, so it's not as tight as like Days of Nights. So you'll have guys that are in the later 15th century and the earlier 15th century, not as much in the 13th century, but or 14th century, but right in the 15th century range. But the event's really cool because we have a formal Deed of Arms. It's gotten big enough to, when we've had it, obviously this year was a wash, that there's pageantry. We come in with a parade, we've been incorporating like a play type aspect where it's got a theme and there's a story and there's a demonstration, and part of the thing right before the Deed of Arms happens. And then after the Deed of Arms, everybody fights. You have pickup fights. They'll have extra events like Daggers at Dark, where guys do Harnisfechten daggers, and they'll do longsword stuff where they fight with longsword and all that stuff. And then at the end of that particular day, we'll have a feast, which is a big feast tent. Big tables, the whole settings, medieval hardware, all that stuff. It's great. They bring us like a multi-course meal, and they'll continue to play. They'll have somebody act out or read out part of whatever the event was. The last deed was the Swan, Deed of the Swan Night, and it was the story of the Swan Night, which I actually played in front of the Swan Night when I got stuck in that. So, but we got through that whole the whole deal for the dinner. It's really immersive. So you kind of get, you get your martial arts part of it, and you get to hang out with all the guys that fight. People come from all over the country, so you get the winners table, where we crowd in, all the fighters crowd in and drink and
we take all the wine.
And, and Reece, what about you? What's your favorite event you've been to so far?
My favorite event is probably Arnie Coates' Harnisfechten Symposium.
Yeah.
So I've been there now 2 times. It was what happened, sorry, I heard something. So that is great because it's Germany, right? It's Europe. That's where the history stuff is. But what I love about it is that each time I've gone there, Tobias Capel has gone there. Arnie Coates needs no introduction. He's a wealth of knowledge and stuff. But there's like 40 or 50 plus people in full harness, and it's all about the subject of Harnisfechten. And guys from all over. There's Andre from Russia. He's a curator in Russia in St. Petersburg. He came there and discussed about certain objects they held at his museum. He was talking about his research with his harness. There's a guy by the name of Reece. I can't pronounce his last name. He's French, but he was talking about Burgundian sources. And then he taught a class on Louis Ash as well. So it just, you know, the whole, it's just a great event. So
You gotta go to Castle. It's
yeah.
an actual.
Anything that's held in the castle is always better, really.
Well, what's cool is like Arnie, he's like a manor, and I guess the Lord who built the manor lived in the castle. He built the manor because he got tired of living in the castle, but because it was small. But
It was
what's
too,
so
the
cool,
castle was too small.
yeah. So, but what's cool is I have a video on our channel where I went to go visit the castle, and you see the coat of arms in stone in the castle. But you see this in Arnie's manor. He's got a door. It has those coats of arms.
Yeah,
The same door
yeah, from
from the time
when
period.
the same guy opened the door and walked in that lived in that castle. I mean,
I want to talk about you just mentioned your channel. I want to talk about your channel just briefly because I want to make sure people have enough time to ask you guys questions. I'm sure people have questions, but so you guys now run the YouTube channel Pursuing the Knightly Arts, and you have 7,500 subscribers. I mean, is that something you ever thought that you'd ever be doing, really?
No. What was kind of fun, you know, we did this initially was like, okay, you know, our own personal pursuit, hence the name Pursuing the Knightly Arts. You know, we get to, you know, it gives us an opportunity where we get to, you know, study sources and just kind of just post what we've been discovering.
We used to always video when we do stuff, you know, like that.
Yeah.
That whole being able to see what you're doing, because when you're in your armor and you move, you feel like you're like this, you know, and you're like, oh, what am I doing? And then you watch a video and you go, oh, I was moving right, because your body detects the armor and you feel like you're moving more than you are, because you actually physically have to make your arm move more than is the armor. So you feel like you're flopping. So we'd always video ourselves to make sure what we were doing looked good, that our technique was right, that we were moving the right way. And it just, you know, one of those things we kept filming it and looking at it, and we're like, why don't we just film the technique and put it where, you know, it's useful, as opposed to just having a hard drive full of a bunch of us doing techniques to look at. We're like, we can put it on the internet and let people see what we're doing, which is the Pursuing the Knightly Arts, right? To watch for pursuit.
Yeah.
And we're like, yeah, like we reached the events, you know, we catch events and show people what's happening. That way more people know, because it's really niche, you know. I mean, it's like,
yeah,
only the people that do it know about it. You know?
Yeah. And you know, the idea was to get more people doing this, right? You know, like we think it's cool. We want to share it to the world, and you know, have more people, you know, be part of it. But what's been fun, you know, we love doing the research, the filming and stuff, but like really the filming stuff and doing that is actually helping us, because like Ben said, we review the footage and stuff, and then we'll critique ourselves like, oh, I'm doing that wrong. I should be doing this. I have a bad habit of leaning in. I should be upright, like the text says, and you know, those sorts of things. So it actually, you know, it works out really good. So.
Well, great. So, yeah, if anybody here hasn't seen it yet, go check that out. It's Pursuing the Knightly Arts. It's on YouTube. So it's a great channel. I really love your opening. That opening is really great.
Oh yeah, we like when we first got that, we watched it like 15 times. Like, that's so cool. Yeah.
So we're gonna take some questions now from viewers. People have been writing some stuff in the chats. We got one from Tim Porsche asking about your thoughts on male brayettes, their comfort or protection.
Well, I've seen a few. They seem to be okay.
My brayettes, all right.
Yeah, he's got a brayette now.
Yeah, they got to be tailored to you.
Like everything.
It's kind of important.
Spend the money.
Yeah, I got one made by an Indian gentleman, and he put the crotch cup was round, looked like an elephant's trunk, and it was on my stomach. So I had to take it completely apart and make a crotch shaped, you know, pouch, and move it down to my crotch. And I retailored it as much as I could. There's some adjustments that still need to be made, but once it's on and in position, I don't even notice it's there. Protection wise, I mean, you're not going to get penetrated through the mail with a blunt sword. So
I think Tom Billiter is watching right now. Tom, are you doing tailored brayettes yet?
Yes.
Yes, he is. I need to message him about mine.
Yeah, I would like to get one.
So let's see what else we have here. Are Kent wants to know: is the ocularium allowed as a target, or I'm sure that it might happen by accident.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why you guys had the perf plate for yours, because it's a legal target. Yeah.
Yep. And I mean, mine's grilled, so I don't require that one. So
Yeah.
that, and we specifically, I believe it's like a dime size for our tips, and then we have to have it covered.
Yeah,
So
so 10 millimeter, no opening can be larger than 10 millimeters in any direction, and the tips are supposed to be a half inch. So you shouldn't be able to get one in there. There shouldn't be anything protruding off your sword that's bigger than a half, or smaller than a half inch.
and part of our rule set, we actually have people do an equipment check and see if what swords are okay, and make sure everyone's equipment is up to standards.
Do you tip your do you tip your swords when you
Yes.
fight? Yeah.
Yeah, it's not really necessary. I mean, a well-rounded sword tip is probably not
Yeah.
going to be a problem. What we've done here is, for our purposes, is that's a piece of Kydex that I wrap the tip in tape, and then heat the Kydex up and scratch it, and then we grind it in a couple spots so tape will hold it on. And mostly it's to keep it from scratching the armor, because nothing's more annoying than having a suit of armor that costs a bunch of money. It's all scratched up from the guy driving his tip into you repeatedly. So
Like somebody, it's like somebody going out. It's like going to somebody and saying, "Hey, you want to go key my car?"
yeah, I mean, they get scratched anyway. But my breastplate and pauldron and everything on this side look like my daughter got in scratching my TV, which happened. And it was just scratched up over here, and it was just from Reece or anybody trying to get their point in with an untipped sword. Yeah. And we finally started doing the tips just to really mitigate the scratching.
So Alexander Hoffman wants to know, says, you've mentioned a little earlier in the regards to how the differences in your individual harness affect certain techniques, but so how much does the style of the harness actually affect the fighting overall and the fencing overall?
It does a lot. So with our experience, like different regions and styles have specific needs and tasks. So like Ben's harness is more suited for equestrian, right? So like fighting on horseback. Let's say they didn't do that, because they did. You see them like in Fiore, they'll ditch the pauldron and then they'll go on foot and stuff. But
yeah, just speaking on my armor, mine was at the time period, like the Italians like to stay mounted. They didn't like to come in on foot. Like English harnesses, you can see a distinct difference in English harness, because they prefer to dismount and then fight on foot, where the Italians like to stay mounted. So the kit is heavier in areas where it's designed to deal with the kind of threats you would encounter on horseback. And then you do see an artwork where the Italians, they've gotten off their horse and they've lost a pauldron here, pauldron there. They've taken off part of this, parts of the armor are missing that they've taken off because it's just too heavy. My kit weighs 85 pounds.
Yeah.
And I'm shy, and the breastplate is light compared to the original, the extant piece. So it actually weighs a little less than the extant piece. So it'd actually be heavier than possibly. I haven't weighed it myself, but from the weights that were given from the museum stuff, that best I can tell, my kit is actually a little light on the side of what that would weigh.
And Reece, your kit's a little lighter than that, right? Because you have a different style, so your kit's a little lighter than that, right?
Oh, it's about like 75 pounds.
Yeah, yours is like mine. Yeah.
Yeah. So, real quick, the point to add on, I like we have a guy that follows our channel, Kale. He has an English harness. That was designed for fighting on foot. That was really difficult to get a point at.
Yeah.
And then you almost have to use proper technique and displacement to get around those sort of that protection.
Yeah.
So that's another part that's been really fun with this. Is like, okay, how am I going to get this guy?
Right.
Okay, well, I'll do zucking. I'll do the twitch. Bam, got him. So you actually have to rely on technique and around to get around that sort of defense.
See if anybody has any other questions for you.
Hi, Tom.
Alex Hahn wants to know what's the website one more time for you guys?
Pursuing the Alley Arts. That's on YouTube. You can find us on Facebook as well. Facebook, admittedly, I just kind of post memes, not really memes, but we do post a couple. Yeah, that's the stuff that gets shared,
Instagram.
Yeah, we got Instagram as well. But primarily we're on YouTube.
Yeah.
is there a weight class style type setup in the combat competition, or is it just all armors thrown in together?
Yep.
All armor thrown together. We even have like some female fighters that take part in this too. So, and they can, hang with the boys,
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm typing in your. Oh, somebody shared it. All right, let's see what else is here. All right, so I think we have time for one or two more questions here. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Yeah, I do. I don't know much about armor at all, especially from modern reproduction stuff. But I'm wondering if is there an equivalent of the big production houses that make armor that's usable, or is all of this sort of low end production armor kind of not really worth buying, and you should just call Tom and send him your measurements?
With male, we personally recommend just get it all custom because that goes underneath the armor, right?
Right.
So we've had people in the past, they get the plate armor first, it's all done up right, and then like, oh yeah, I was gonna do male last. Well, then now the male's not done right, it's buying their arm, they didn't account for that sizing difference. And you think that male isn't that bulky, but it is.
Yeah. I have a historically patterned male shirt. Reece has one. He has a standard. Reece has the fitted arms that have, the elbow and everything. And it's real critical that his male has to be on him in exactly the right place when you put the arm harness on, or you can't move his arm. So the pattern and the shaping really matters. If it was a tube, he wouldn't be able to bend his arm right because it's going to wad up. So it's like exactly the right shape so that he can move his arm where he needs to.
Yeah, I years ago I had bought some like Indian voiders, traded with a friend of mine, and then I was like, all right, I'll try it out the first feet of arms at Scott's, and I put it on, and I was scheduled to fight Axe.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm like, oh no, I couldn't raise my arm.
Yeah.
I couldn't protect my head, so I had to quickly take it all off and whatever. But yeah, male, personal, just get it custom made. Now, as far as off the rack stuff, there is actually a decent amount of stuff. If you do some research, look around. We've done actually a couple lectures on this at events like C7 on this before about getting people in a harness for cheap.
Yeah, you can get an early 15th century kit. You'll look a lot like everybody else that bought the same kit, but you can get an early 15th century kit for like, what was it, $1,300, $1,200, like the entire kit.
Yeah. And so
it's picking pieces here and there, and it's not 100% accurate, but it's pretty good to where, for the money off the shelf.
Yeah, and if you're really picky like we are, you can always just if you're handy, you can shape alter and tweak it and stuff like that. But like, for like, we recommend like late 14th, early 15th century. That's the time period that we do, and that's pretty. It doesn't require as much shaping and stuff.
Armor's easier to fit.
Yeah, armor's easier to fit and stuff. But there's lots of stuff off the shelf. And what's great about it is that since we're going for the gaps and openings of armor, it's not like we're going to be bashing the armor and stuff. So like, the arms and legs are typically thinner gauge steel historically, So, but we're going for the gaps and openings. So it should last you a long time. Like my harness is 16 gauge steel, a little heavier than I want it to be, but I mean, I've been hit with axes, spears, all that stuff, get little dents here and there, but it's held up really well.
He's got a really nice pair of arms that he got somewhere from somebody.
Yeah, it was all rusted.
Yeah. You cleaned him up nice though.
Yeah, I did. I did a lot of work, but
sorry. All right, we got time for one more question for you guys, and this is the hardest question of all. Asking all the presenters here, what's your favorite sword?
You go ahead.
Favorite sword, like sword
of all time. What is your favorite sword?
Man, that's a tough one because there is definitely a large variety to choose from. I mean, my current favorite is kind of the Brescia Spadona. As a really, I've got somewhat of a replica of it over here.
Go grab it.
Yeah.
I think I know Reese's answer.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think I know what
Yeah,
he's.
that's why I'm having him go first.
So I got, this dude's got,
Oh yeah, is that
Yeah.
one of the Bowler Arms 15th century Italian? Yeah.
blade. It's a blade appropriate, like the design of the blade's actually appropriate for the sword.
Hmm.
There are swords with this type of configuration, although it was a single hand sword with this particular the blade setup, but I just love the lines of the sword. I love the little hooky cross guard.
I love the
Yeah,
pommel
basically.
on that.
The mace,
Yeah.
yeah, pommel. I would totally, fight a guy unarmored with this, no problem.
My little one-hander behind me here. That little one, the bigger one-hander behind me. That's a Bowler Arms too. I actually really like what they're coming out.
Yeah, I actually I'm pretty impressed with the quality price.
Yeah, for a couple $100.
You know. Okay, so I guess mine. It's not the best example. I will get a different example in the future, but mine, as of right now, which is of interest to me, it's been
Yeah, I knew it.
this is a great sword. So this is seen in northern Germany and Scandinavia. So as of late, Ben and I have been researching to our next sort of harnesses styles we want to do, and I've been diving really deep into Scandinavian sources. So if you can tell, my family is largely Swedish and Danish, so a lot of Scandinavian, and I was particularly interested in what was going on in Scandinavia during the Middle Ages, and been finding some really cool stuff. I might do a video on that in the future, but when I saw this type of sword, I was like, okay, that's weird and cool. I want to learn everything about it. So you're gonna see a link, but
Gigantic.
Who made that one, Reese? Who's made?
this was like some Chinese knockoff of I'm guessing Albion Dane. There's some things wrong with it. The cross guard is thicker than it should be, but it was like $260.
Yeah.
And the idea was that I was going to use this in like group melees and
We're
stuff.
grinding the blade to make it a little more appropriate for what we do.
Yeah.
That way he can actually use it and
So I didn't want to take like an Albion Dane
Yeah,
and use it in the
grind it.
field and
Yeah.
I was intending to use it, so I wanted to be like a training tool.
Yeah.
This is I think according to Per Jensen and Peter Johnson, the real one's like 3.5 pounds. It's like 6 pounds. So there's some bulk on it that I need to try to take out.
Well, I don't need to cut you guys short, but it is time to get ready for the next session. I want to thank you guys so much for being here. It's been a really great conversation. Learned a lot from you guys. Make sure you guys check out their their YouTube channel, Pursuing the Knightly Arts. Check out their dank memes on the Pursuing the Knightly Arts Facebook page, and check them out on Instagram because they're doing really great stuff and get their name out there. So thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
And we'll be back. We're going to take a 3-minute break just so I can run and use the bathroom quick. And then James Hester will be coming on. He's going to be giving a talk. Where's the talk? James Hester, he'll be doing the battle damage on late medieval swords. So this is going to be a really fascinating talk, a nice counterpart to James Elders's talk yesterday. So we'll be right back with that.